All right, what's going on, you guys? Nick here with Nick's Around the Power. So in this video, I want to talk about the 1991 Mr. Olympia competition. So the interesting thing about the 1991 Mr. Olympia is that this was Dorian Yates' first ever Mr. Olympia, taking second to Lee Haney. So this 1991 Olympia was really Dorian Yates' first impression on the international bodybuilding community, on the biggest stage of them all. Very early on in his career, I think this was only the first or second year of even being an IFBB pro bodybuilder and being seen by the world for the first time as this massive new coming bodybuilder from the UK that no one had ever really seen before or heard much from before. He kind of came out of nowhere. Again, that's why they called him the Shadow, because in between Olympias, he would just kind of go back to the UK, train in silence. He wouldn't really, be that visible to the public. Then he'd come back the next year at the Mr. Olympia, dominate, then go straight back to the UK and do the same thing for the next year. But the main reason I wanted to make a video on this particular Mr. Olympia is, number one, there's not a whole lot of photos out there of the 1991 Mr. Olympia or of Dorian Yates' first ever Olympia appearance. And I do think it's a significant moment in bodybuilding history because, again, you have Lee Haney, 8-time Mr. Olympia. He would win this Olympia and retire after winning this Olympia. So Dorian Yates, a lot of people say he scared Lee Haney, and Lee Haney saw the writing on the wall when he saw Dorian at that 1991 Mr. Olympia, and maybe Lee Haney wouldn't have retired had Dorian Yates not been there to push him, and Lee Haney probably knowing what would happen the following year when Dorian Yates had time to improve and come in bigger. So a lot of people say that Lee Haney made the smart move, retiring after the 1991 Mr. Olympia. But again, the reason why I wanted to make this video is because there are so few photos of this Olympia. And one of my subscribers, actually, I want to give him credit here, Andy Castor, contacted me. He was actually in attendance in the audience at the 1991 Mr. Olympia. And he actually has a bunch of photos never before seen, never published before, just personal photos that he took from the 1991 Mr. Olympia, in particular of Dorian Yates and Lee Haney. So, these are legendary bodybuilding photos from the debut, the Olympia debut of 6-time Mr. Olympia Dorian Yates, and from the final Olympia of 8-time Mr. Olympia record holder Lee Haney. So the 1991 Mr. Olympia was really dubbed kind of the dawn of the mass monsters because in the early 90s, there weren't really any mass monsters around, and Dorian Yates was really the first. Now, granted, in the later 90s, people do think of some of the mass monsters like Marcus Rule or Paul Dillette, but those guys weren't around at the 1991 Mr. Olympia. So to give you guys some perspective here, the top 10 at the 1991 Mr. Olympia, obviously Lee Haney placed first, winning that show. Dorian Yates took second. You had Vince Taylor taking third. Lee Labrada taking fourth. Again, another shorter, smaller bodybuilder, not a mass monster by any means. Sean Ray taking fifth. Again, another shorter, smaller bodybuilder. Sonny Schmidt taking sixth. Francis Benfato, a.k.a. Mr. Symmetry, taking seventh. Again, another smaller guy, just known for being very balanced and proportioned. Thierry Pastel placing eighth. Again, another smaller guy. I think he was actually under 200 pounds on stage, known for his incredible abdominal development and also the size of his arms. You had Akeem Albrecht in ninth place. Now, Akeem Albrecht is actually a very interesting IFBB bodybuilder because he's the only IFBB professional bodybuilder to place top 10 at the Mr. Olympia and then go on to have a successful career as a pro wrestler in the WWF. So Akeem Albrecht was a top 10 finisher at the Olympia and a WWF wrestler. So not a lot of people actually realize that. And then in 10th place, you had Rich Gaspari. So, more than half of the top 10 at the 1991 Mr. Olympia were guys that were right around 200 pounds, some of those guys under 200 pounds. So in the early 90s, smaller guys were really dominating. And then 1991, all of a sudden, you have this Dorian Yates guy come out of nowhere. This massive guy, pretty much the biggest guy on stage at this point. So when Dorian came out on stage, it was kind of like an oh shit moment for everybody there. Even though Dorian hadn't reached nearly the peak of his size at the 1991 Mr. Olympia, he would make tremendous improvements from that point forward. But Dorian was still a sight to be seen even at his first Mr. Olympia. I think even as a downsized version of himself, he was still, very proportional, good conditioning, good balance, and he was still a very sizable guy next to 8-time Mr. Olympia Lee Haney. You could see the potential in Dorian. So I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Please give it a thumbs up if you did enjoy it. And if you want to see more videos like this, diving in depth into various Mr. Olympias of various years. Thank you guys for watching the video. Please give it a thumbs up if you enjoyed it. Nick Strength and Power, signing out.